sports fans. We're with Will Leer today, the Under Armour ambassador for the Under Armour All Out Mile. Will, greetings and salutations.
Great to be here.
So Under Armour's launching this thing. I think it's pretty cool. It's an all-out mile, and there's a registration period up till August 30th. Then there's training from coaches and top athletes for a month. And then there's 11 days where you show your stuff. Pretty well how they're setting it up?
That's pretty close. Yeah.
So tell me about the beauty of racing the mile. You've run some pretty darn quick ones. What's so intriguing about the mile?
Yeah, the mile, I always said, was like, it's short enough. It's like a mini skirt, right? It's like short enough to be interesting, but long enough to, take some contemplation.
Okay.
It's not a sprint where you just like turn your brain off and go. There's enough time to play some mental gymnastics in there. There's tactics, maybe fewer tactics in an all-out affair, in an all-out mile.
Yeah.
But I think one of the great things about the mile, irrespective of the race itself, is the preparation, because the mile requires strength and it requires speed. So you can just do all different kinds of workouts in your preparation to run that race that, when I was at my best, that would take, under 4 minutes. But even if it's your first time ever running a mile, it's a whole hell of a lot shorter than a marathon. And the types of training that you get to do, just like, it's always interesting. It's never, a marathon is just like, how much can you run? You're doing it all. It's like fairly slow, low intensity pace. When you see kids out on a playground, you don't see them jogging around. You see them sprinting. Yeah. You see them running fast, because that's fun. Yeah. Running fast is fun. And so if we can sort of like get back to that playful nature of what makes running truly fun, I think that's what the mile's all about.
I'm going to have you time travel. Was the mile intimidating for you when you ran it in high school?
I don't know if it was so intimidating as it was not how I identified as a runner. I loved to sort of like, in high school, I considered the middle distance events, the 400 and the 800, which are basically now in the professional sphere, we consider those the long sprints.
Yeah.
But I love the 4 and the 8 because I got to run the 4x4 and I got to run the 4x8. And I was, I grew up in team sports. I didn't really grow up in individual sports. And so the opportunity to run with teammates, I always thought that was super fun. That's where I got the most out of myself in high school. And so the idea of going and lining up by myself and running a mile, it took me a little bit to get used to. I think I only ran the mile, like 2 or 3 times in high school.
Okay.
So
wow.
It was a little bit like I was doing it for points at the conference meet, doing it for points at True Team State, and that was sort of it.
Mm-hmm. What about, was there a different approach in college?
Yeah, so college was the first time I ever became a full-time runner. It was my first ever like full cross country into a track season.
Wow.
And, I think I learned a lot about myself in the cross country season. That I was able to handle some of these longer distance strength oriented workouts. And naturally that led the intrigue. Also, in college, we ran the 1500 meters. So the 1500, this sounds stupid to say, but the 1500 feels remarkably shorter than 1 mile.
Yeah.
But that being said, I still ran the 800, still ran the 4x4, but we didn't have a 4x8. And so, my coach just said, it's cool that you ran the 800 in high school, but you're a miler.
And then when we saw you start to run pro, I saw you do everything from the mile and the occasional time when they did a 2, mostly 1500 and 3, then also the 5. Was the mile more of a treat for you as an elite athlete? How did you approach it?
Yeah, it's being able to run the mile is being a miler in professional track and field was fun, because when you tell people that you run professionally, they say, "Oh, do you run the marathon?" Because that's sort of everyone's first experience seeing, quote unquote professional runners, is in like, whatever your local marathon is, there's probably some really fast guys at the front that are coming there to earn some money.
Yeah.
But then I could say, no, I run the mile. And, oftentimes that's met with like, oh, really? Just a mile? And then when you tell them how fast you do it, the intrigue comes back. But we have a relationship in America with the mile because everyone runs it in elementary school and in high school gym class. And so everyone remembers going out there and running that mile And so, you know, it's a little bit easier to connect with people on that level. But yeah, since we were mostly running the 1,500 meters, when we got a chance to run the mile, it was always super special.
I seem to recall you ran your PB for the mile. Was it in Ireland?
Yep, it was in Dublin.
And we've had this conversation a couple times, but I recall you telling me that it just felt, it wasn't like it felt easy, but it felt just like right. Can you describe what it's like when you're all there and you run a personal best?
You know, I'd say that running a personal, the mile is interesting, right? I've run personal bests where after every lap, I've said, if this gets any worse over the next 400 meters, I'm going to drop out because it's that painful.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to dissuade anyone from going all out in a mile, but it's just to say that, you know, it's short enough that you can tolerate an immense amount of discomfort. But there's also been races where it's felt pretty effortless. And either way, it's no less rewarding when you cross the finish line, when you run that personal best time. However it felt during the race, when you run that personal best time, you feel that elation when you cross the finish line. And that's really, I think, what most of the runners that I know is what we're striving for. Whether you're, you know, the feeling of winning that medal or the feeling of running that personal best, where you've done something that you've never done before, is a pretty incredible feeling. Yeah, and again, the beauty of the mile is like when you do the appropriate training, when you go all in on this endeavor, it's amazing how much you can improve and how, you know, okay, you know, maybe running this certain pace for one lap feels very, very hard. Well, in a month's time, that's going to feel really smooth and feel comfortable. And you almost feel like you're out there floating these paces that, you know, before seemed, you know, almost unattainable. And that's one of the really cool things about the mile is you get to cover ground really quickly and smoothly.
You were coached by Ron Warhurst for a part of your career, correct?
Yeah, about a decade.
Okay. Ron is probably, in my mind, the dean of mile coaches. I don't think he's gotten the respect. You know, there's just so many guys out there, and I can just go, you know, off my hand, and your contemporaries and people still running today. What was it about? What was special about Ron being a coach for milers?
You know, Ron right now coaches milers. And I think that's in a large part because, you know, the most famous athlete that he's ever coached, Nick Willis, is a miler, right? Yeah. So milers are gravitating to Ann Arbor to train with Nick and Ron. I think Ron's secret to success is not necessarily, he had some very far out there groundbreaking ideas with regards to training, which have now been sort of widely adopted by a lot of other people. Ron's genius is in his ability to get the most out of you on a daily basis. And he's just this like unbelievably charismatic person who treats you with an incredible amount of respect. So when you go to the track, like you want to work hard for him, and he's out there to make sure that he's doing his best as a coach to get the most out of you as an athlete. And like that symbiosis is, I don't know. I think that it's pretty rare in the world. Ron is just like, he's this unique person that people gravitate to, and like you can't help but love the guy. Yeah. And you know, he just makes you want to go run hard. You say the word Ron Warhurst, and I'm like, I want to run.
Yeah. You've had successes from 800 to 5,000 meters. Do you think racing the mile well helped you with your longer distance races?
I think that running the other distances helped me run a good mile.
Okay.
And again, goes back to what I was talking about before. The beauty of training for the mile is that there's some people who run the mile from a speed perspective. So they're more sort of 800 meter mile runners. And then there's some people who are sort of like mile 3K, mile 5K. Over the course of my career, I definitely transitioned from being a speed-based miler to a strength-based miler. And it just sort of like, it's very minor tweaks that take you from one middle distance event to another. You know, where like, okay, this week I would do a speed session. It's like, oh, I'll do a strength session if I have a 5K coming up. But for the most part, the workouts are very much the same.
When you was it 14 when you ran the indoor in Albuquerque, and you was it 13 or 14 when you
When I won
won
both,
both?
that was 13.
13. What was tough for you? Had just amazing finishes in both, which I thought was totally cool. What's the difference between running a mile in flat or under high altitude? What was the effect for you running in Albuquerque as opposed to running, in Manhattan, Kansas?
Sure. It's the altitude plays different roles, affects people differently. For those particular races, I would always go train. If I knew that the indoor championships was in Albuquerque, which is 5,000 feet, I would go do a stint of training up in Flagstaff at about 7,000 feet to acclimate my body to be able to handle running really hard at 5,000 feet. I think one of the more important things when you're racing at altitude is also what lends itself to running a fast mile is like a metered effort, right? If you go out way too hard at altitude, that's going to catch up with you much more quickly than it will maybe at sea level. Sea level, you can maybe like have a slower lap in the middle of the race, sort of recharge your battery again, spool up that turbo, and then finish hard. At altitude, if you go out way too hard, your tires are deflated. And best of luck to you, madam or sir, because it's going to be a long last half of the race. And you'll remember that, and you won't probably do it ever again. But I think that if you go back and watch my race in Albuquerque, there were some guys that went out really, really fast at the front end of that race. And thankfully I'd run a race the night before. And so I had a little bit of fatigue in my legs, and I was like, I can't go out that hard. And so I sort of ran these even splits for the first 3/4 of the race. And then when saw some people start to come back to me, that's when it's like, oh, got to turn my brain on again and start going after people, pass one, pass another, pass two more. And then 100 meters to go. It's like, it's game on.
What does it feel like to pass people at the end of a race?
Feels a hell of a lot better than being passed. It's like being Pac-Man, you're like eating up little fruits and gives you superpower. It's great. It's an awesome feeling. Highly recommend it.
Cool. Well, Will, thank you very much for this. And then we're going to come back and ask you some questions about training for an all-out mile. But we've been with Will Leer. He is the Under Armour ambassador for the Under Armour All-Out Mile. Registration goes till the 30th of August, and then we're starting training for a month, and then there's 11 days of racing. And you can find everything at, you remember the website?
UAalloutmile.com.
Wow, it's like you memorized it, man. Will, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.